Welcome to OpenHMIS, an open source platform for your homeless management information system. But OpenHMIS is much more than open source. It is a HUD-compliant HMIS that delivers the tools you need to provide the services your clients need. OpenHMIS is not just an HMIS. It is a community of practice where people with a common interest can come together and build a solution together. Whether it is improving the source code, sharing best practices, integrating proven applications, or offering new solutions, everyone in the community can find a way to contribute and make a difference. Most of the people in the profession of providing service to the homeless did not get into this line of work to pursue their passion for data entry, data cleaning, or even data quality. In fact, many caregivers might consider HMIS a chore, and would just as soon HMIS would just go away so they can do the job they signed up for, helping the homeless. But HMIS doesn't have to be a chore. It can be a tool that helps the caregiver and homeless service provider improve their good work in the lives of the homeless. It is not about collecting more data. It is about how we use the data. That is how we realize the benefits in using OpenHMIS. Minimize the chore, maximize the solutions. How do we get there from here? In the beginning, HMIS was pretty simple, a way to collect and record information about the homeless. A little spreadsheet or database with some client info, just a few data elements to keep track of. The client's name and ID, date of birth, really much easier than going to the doctor. And since we wanted to share that information between different programs, we needed one more table that kept track of a client's enrollment, when they entered the program and when they exited. Still pretty simple. With an ID in the program enrollment table that matched an ID in the client table, we could get useful information about each client enrolled in our program. With this connection or relationship between the two tables, HUD soon realized they could tap into this information to get valuable clues to help end homelessness. But soon HUD researchers and data analysts realized that in order to better understand what was working or not working, they needed more information. Information about the client, demographics, veteran status, housing information. So we were asked to add more information and more tables for households, finance, special needs, and more. And all this information was somehow related to the answer to how to end homelessness. So eventually we ended up with a more complex system that looked more like spaghetti. And now every change or new HUD requirement that HUD wants to make has an impact on the database, development, the software, the reports, the user interface, and these all impact the limited resources of development and training. So instead of developers working on new innovative tools that help users and programmers, developers spend way too much time fixing code, bugs, and updating reports so that we can make sure that we meet HUD's requirements and are 100% compliant. And this isn't just one HMIS vendor. It affects every HMIS vendor, whether they are a one-person consulting firm or a 100-person shop. This work has to be done. There are over 30 different HMIS vendors that need to meet the same requirements in the most efficient interpretation they can muster. 30 vendors times 2 employees times 10 weeks times 40 hours per week. That's 24,000 hours of development that could go into ending homelessness. And there's no guarantee that each vendor is interpreting the preliminary recs, specs, and standards that HUD intended. If you look at the HUD HMIS data standards, it really isn't that difficult. There are still only about 30 required data elements to keep track of. So if we begin to remove some of the additional enhancements and options and workarounds that are no longer required, and focus on the HUD required elements, we can come up with a fairly simple data structure that is easier for developers to understand, collaborate, and agree on, and come up with one standard data structure and one set of business rules. We then provide one easy user interface for minimum intake and admin that makes it simple to meet HUD requirements. We provide only the required reports like APR and AHAR, along with some data quality reports just for good measure. So we now have a much simpler HMIS that is easier to understand and easier to use, making it simpler to enhance with the applications, tools, services that our users need to help their clients. So we now have a much simpler HMIS that is easier to understand and easier to use. Make it simpler to enhance with the applications, tools, services that our users need to help their clients. Developers, users, and clients can realize the benefits from new tools and applications that help programs work efficiently, users become more productive, and provide the services our clients need, like coordinated intake and assessment, case management, data analysis, street outreach, vulnerability indexes, data integration with other shared services, and a whole lot more. How do we make a difference with OpenHMIS? We begin by providing the basics in an open environment to share through our open development model, a core OpenHMIS that can be shared by all developers and programmers, nonprofits or commercial vendors, open source or proprietary software, users and stakeholders, funders and grantees, where anyone and everyone can come together with a seat at the table to discuss what is best for the developer, the user, the agency, homeless service provider, and most importantly, the homeless community. We make it simple for people to come together to share their ideas, their best practices, and their code to build a better HMIS. We provide simple access on the web. We make it open. Open source software, open database connectivity, open record sharing, and security. Open Book Academy, an open development model that is accessible to anyone over the web at openhmis.org. When most people hear open, they think open source software, and that certainly applies to OpenHMIS, but this is more than open source. We're also talking about open database connectivity, open record sharing and security, Open Book Academy, open development model. Are you starting to get the idea that this is really open? Open source software to allow developers and programmers to share or enhance source code or an entire basic HMIS implementation. Open database connectivity to give developers, data analysts, and users direct access to the data tables without writing a line of code. Open records sharing and security to make sure that all the users and stakeholders can share data between programs, continuums, and applications. Open Book Academy to reduce the learning curve and put all of the development, user training, and best practices out there on the web in YouTube format. And an open development model that leverages a community of practice to share and communicate our ideas and innovation. If you are new to open source software, we can get you up to speed very quickly. Everything you want to know about OSS is on our website. We're taking lessons learned from some of the most successful open source software projects out there. And when most people hear open source software, they think free software to download or share, but more importantly, we want developers and programmers to be able to leverage the source code to use, copy, and most importantly, enhance. Now let's break it down. We start with the database, an open source database, MySQL, the most popular open source database management system in the world. In order for our programmers to get involved and write applications, they need an easy way to communicate or interface with the data. We give them a very efficient open source application programmers interface, or API. We need developers to know in a few hours if this is a platform they can use to develop with or plug in their existing tools. The developer site for issue tracking, bug fixes, commits, wiki, and discussion. Another piece of the open concept is open database connectivity, a way to connect to the database without programming while using report writer tools you already are familiar with, like FileMaker, Excel, Microsoft Access, and Data Analyst. The idea is to give you easy access to your data. Open records sharing and security. We recognize the importance of sharing information through a community information sharing system, and we understand that this should be what homeless management systems are about. Sharing data between programs and applications for a true continuum of care. Sharing the data for program performance, case management, and decision support, and at the same time protecting the client's confidentiality. Open Book Academy is a great example of learning from best practices. We put the information into the user's hands on demand when you need it. With simple 10-minute videos, you can learn whatever you need to know when you need it. Whether it's learning the application programmer's interface or how to conduct an efficient street outreach, you can learn it here. Even if you never use OpenHMIS, you can learn from others' best practices right here. Our open development model incorporates all of these open strategies in order to build a better HMIS together. Community of practice isn't our idea, but it's a good one. People coming together in conference calls, go-to-meetings, Google Hangouts, blogs, wikis, and discussion pages on the web, staying connected and giving their input in a more meaningful way. Another part of our OpenHMIS strategy is the cloud. We put OpenHMIS in the cloud for reliability, scalability, and accessibility. Our Google Cloud storage consists of MySQL in the cloud. And although the cloud is our main development environment and where we are hosting our information, there may be applications that want to stand alone, and everything that works in the cloud will also work on separate systems in your office or on a single laptop. We also have configurations that work with an iPhone, iPad, or smartphone. And if a community wants to go at it alone and develop their own HMIS, we will provide a reference, source code, and specifications on how to build your own OpenHMIS. So what can OpenHMIS do for me? Well, we start out with a core HMIS. With nothing more than a login and password, you can log into OpenHMIS, enter your client information, and create the required HUD reports, AR, APR, and some data quality reports if you need them. But if you are interested in doing a little more than that, there just might be an app for that. We bring developers and users together. We need to think outside the box. We're no longer restrained by what is required by HMIS, so we can leverage our HMIS data to provide new and better services.
Like Homeless Helper.